Hello and welcome to the last little movie for this section. The focus of this movie will be on the learning and teaching model at MCCC GP training. So where are we up to? So far we have had the welcome and introduction via a short movie which I hope provided an overview. You then had an opportunity to share your thoughts about effective learning via the forum. This was followed by a super quick snapshot, learning and teaching principles. I then provided an opportunity for you to access in a little more depth and breadth if you chose. And did you access any of those readings? You might have and made some comments in the forum. But as I've mentioned, the focus of this movie is the next learning outcome, the second learning outcome, which is understand how the principles of effective learning and teaching are applied to the program at MCCC GP training. As you are well aware, the AGPT training program at MCCC is a combination of both the in-practice and out-of-practice learning and teaching opportunities, an apprenticeship model, if you will. MCCC's approach to the education program for both the in-practice and out-of-practice is based on the following educational theories. So work-based learning, which is pretty self-explanatory, it's on-the-job learning. Situated theory, which is about authentic learning activities in either the real workplace or a close simulation, so relevant and authentic learning activities. Experiential learning is the notion of having the direct experience and then reflecting on that experience. Transformative learning is where there's a change in our frame of reference, in the way we approach or think about something. Self-directed learning, where the learner takes responsibility, and we recognise that in our attempts to get our registrars to have an active and relevant learning plan. And then the notion of deep learning. So we're looking for deep rather than surface learning. Surface learning tends to be associated with those learners who concentrate on memorizing and understanding concepts in very limited contexts, always looking for the right answer. Where deep learning is where the learner is not only able to recite facts and understand basic concepts, but they're able to apply them in a range of situations. They're able to analyze, test, synthesize, and manage, changing contexts. I will provide a couple of articles for you to look at if you're interested in that notion of deep learning. So if we just focus on the out-of-practice learning, the flow tends to go like this. We have pre-workshop learning activities that then flow into the actual workshop, the face-to-face learning, followed by the post-workshop learning activities. And as we've already mentioned, that is supported by the learning that happens in practice. In fact, it's the reverse. We are in fact supporting the learning that happens in practice because that's where the bulk of the learning is happening. And of course at MCCC, apart from the out-of-practice program, the in-practice program, we're also expecting the registrars to engage enthusiastically in self-directed learning via their learning plans. So again, just focusing on the out-of-practice program, we really do have what we call a flipped learning sequence, and that is that we're trying to find an alternative to lecturing in terms of being able to deliver content and introduce new concepts. We've then got a notion that we need to check in, a validation activity as such, before they move on to the face-to-face learning, where we acknowledge that work that's been done prior to. We deal with questions, clarification, extension, application, and then the notion of that directed learning activity that follows on, where there's revision, practice, extension again, and an opportunity for the registrars to consolidate. So that is that flipped classroom model that we talked about in that very first movie. So if I just take a little bit more time here, because this really is the guts of how we apply that learning theory. So the lecturing alternative for us is usually based in MEL, where we ask our registrars to engage in research. There might be readings of articles, a podcast. It might be a module from the MEL topic library. There could be digital stories like this. We could ask them to complete external modules, for example, from the Black Dog Institute. Then we need to check in with them in some way. It might be that we have some questions, and you'll see that in the modules in the topic library, that there's that check-in with a series of questions or a quiz. You could use a forum to do that. I've tried to do that in this flow, this learning sequence. But we could also ask people to bring something to the workshop, and it's a way of acknowledging those pre-workshop activities, that the way that we've tried to provide content to them. It's not just there for any token purpose. We actually want them to engage in it, and we want to check in that they've done it. We then go on to the face-to-face learning, and most of our workshops are heavily embedded with social learning, case-based discussions and problem solving, application of the knowledge learnt via the pre-activity, clinical skills stations, discussions, all of those things that I've got there. And then again, following that learning sequence, we have more directed learning activities which provide the registrars with an opportunity to revise what happened in the workshops, maybe practice, maybe extend, but also consolidate. So if we go back to the start, and we were looking at how we apply the principles of effective learning and teaching to the program at MCCC, and then I mentioned those educational theories which really do underpin what we do. I'm just trying to show you in this slide some examples of how we apply each of those individual theories. So the work-based learning theory we see obviously when the registrars are learning in practice, very similar with the situated learning, that authentic learning. If it's not in practice, it's in the workshops, and we're trying to make them case-based. Experiential learning in practice obviously comes to mind. You can see how important that is, but also things like clinical skills stations, my apologies, transformative learning, and I immediately think of clinical reasoning, that metacognition, thinking about how we think, self-directed learning. Any of those pre or post workshops we ask our registrars to engage in is them, self-directing their own learning, but also their own learning plan. And then deep learning, we always encouraging our registrars to reflect, to problem solve, and to apply their knowledge in a range of contexts. And if we go back to the second movie, not only those educational, the big theories that we've just spoken about, but the dot points that we came up with when we were talking about the principles of learning and teaching. It's important that we do keep these in mind, and we think about ways that we can meet these dot points. We certainly don't want to forget them. And these will come back in the next part of this learning sequence, which is the bit I'm going to do on Friday morning via webinar, fingers crossed. And we'll link this dot point list particularly with the session planning process. So I'm looking forward to Skyping in on Friday morning. I'm hoping that the technology works, where we can look at this list and how it helps us make pedagogical decisions about how we actually facilitate learning. But I'm setting you a little challenge. I want you to listen to this movie again and tell me how many times I use the word notion. I reckon it must be up around a dozen. I couldn't stop myself. It just kept falling out of my mouth. So I apologise, and I hope this has all been good. I'm really looking forward to hearing your feedback and talking to you on Friday. Cheers.